supposed to be making all the decisions. Reality is that's not the truth. I know, so I did put, it's called a RACI chart in there, and it talks about responsible. So begin with your teams, you know, especially when you're leading a mission team. I think this is a great part of your orientation. You begin to say, who's responsible? When somebody's responsible for something, that means they're supposed to be doing the task, right? Because the other thing is, oh, your job description, you're the team leader or you're the worship leader. We just assume you know what you're supposed to do. But really, in every team, you're building a new dynamic altogether because it's different sets of people, different personalities, different skill sets. So you have to have this conversation at the onset because people start resenting each other. They're like, well, I got bypassed because nobody told me about this decision. I'm the one supposed to make that decision. Well, if you clearly define who's the decision maker for each area of responsibility, then you wouldn't even have that conversation. So the next you have is accountable. So who's accountable? So the person that's responsible is the one doing the task. The person who's accountable is whose head will roll if this goes wrong, right? So I would assume that in most cases in these big trips, it might be Janet, right? Somebody else is doing the work, but it's really her that's accountable to the main office if stuff goes bad. So, and who has the authority to make the decision? Janet doesn't have to make all the decisions in every trip, right? And this is where the next thing will come in about delegation. But I think that's the false sense of leadership, and it's not sustainable when there's only one person at the top blocking everybody else from making decisions, and you think that your role as the leader is to have all the best ideas. The reason Google has been successful, and it's only been around for 17 years. It's a teenager company, but we have 65,000 all over the world, right? So the reason we've been able to grow at that pace, when I started there were 10,000 people. So now that's, what, 6 times over in the last 9 years. So the thing that they really do well as a company is making sure that people know their roles, but also it's not one person that makes all the decisions. You begin to spread that out. Okay, you're the one leading the finances, you can make decisions on that, but we'll talk more about that when it comes to delegation. And then the C is for who's being consulted. Anyone who can tell me more about the task? I'm not, maybe there's a person that's an expert. Maybe it's somebody else who's gone on a mission trip before you to Cambodia, and it's your first time as a team lead there. You begin to interview them. What were the lessons you learned? Like, how do we interact with a culture? So that would be the C, who's consulted. And obviously, I think in all the stuff that you put together and all the trips, AGLOW main office would always be in the C, right? Or maybe not, but... And then the I stands for informed. Anyone whose work depends on this task, or who has to be kept updated about the program. Some people need to be consulted, but some people just need to be informed, right? A lot of people will say, well, I was never informed about that. Why are you guys doing that thing? Did you know that actually that's a bad thing to do within this nation, right? So you begin to identify who the people that would care about your project. And this is what you would call stakeholders, right? They have a stake for the success of your trip, for the success of your project, for the success of whatever outputs your ministries are producing. So the second thing I have there is delegation. This is a sensitive topic for ministry leaders. I've heard it often enough from pastors where they say, well, this is the very reason I don't delegate, because it doesn't get done the way I need it to get done. But there's actually a right way of delegating, and we just need to be educated how to do that. So first is, I think, if you can take a moment just to reflect, what are the things that you continue to do, but it's time to delegate, right? Understand what season you're in. Maybe you just love creating posters. Maybe you just love setting up these tables. But is that really your core strength? If your core strength is actually mobilizing teams, should you be spending time setting up tables? No, right? Because You being able to delegate and recognizing what you need to start letting go actually puts you in your core strength and allows others to operate in theirs, right? So if their core strength is decorating tables, and I just enjoy it because I'm a crafty person, that takes away from me being able to mobilize and oversee the whole thing. So yeah, begin to recognize that. So the first thing you need to do when you delegate is obviously you have to know who you labor amongst, right? So you need to know who would be the right person for this task. And the second thing, you don't just delegate tasks, you have to delegate authority. Because if I'm telling you to do something, oh, you can have petty cash and you can spend it however the team needs to spend it. And then at the end of the day, you berate that person or somehow correct them saying, well, why didn't you tell me about this $10 charge? What about that $5 charge? Right? You have to delegate the authority. But it doesn't just mean they have to do everything and they have a say in all of it. There has to be a definition of, you still have to be accountable as the leader. You have to provide covering. And I know that sometimes it can get nasty even in ministry. In the business world it certainly happens. But there are some leaders that just don't want their people to succeed. So they begin to assign tasks that they know will never get done so that they can have the last ha-ha and say, see, this is why I don't delegate. But really, what we want as leaders, I think the true definition of a leader is somebody who makes leaders out of others. Amen. Right? Amen. Where you begin to say, as women of AGLOW, with all these years of ministry and leadership experience, that let our floor be your ceiling. Let our ceilings be your floor. Right? Where we as the next generation can step in and say, wow, okay, I am walking into the calling that Janet opened in the nations. And I begin, because realistically, all of you, there's nobody special necessarily, but all of us that are born and alive in this time, we're moving in the momentum of the prayers of the people before us. Right? So we can't claim that we're the one who started this, but we never knew who were the first intercessors that God gave this vision to carry out. And here you are now with the open door and just walking through it. So that's what we want. That's the mentality that we want as leaders. We're raising up people. So we're setting them up for success. We're not just delegating tasks, but authority, but also saying to them, hey, if you ever run into a roadblock, if there's anything that's confusing, I want you to know I can continue to be an escalation point. And I'm going to be a safe place for you to ask questions, and we can have conversation. Because that's how you can coach, right? Somebody will come up to you, well, what do you think about this decision? And then you'd be like, nope, I already delegated to you. That's not how it should be done. You begin to, have that exchange and be like, well, actually, what if you thought about it this way? So that's the other thing. And then the last, when it comes to delegating, we need to be able to celebrate our people. If they've been able to accomplish a task, we need to, affirm them. But even within our coaching, there has to be regular check-ins for progress. Right? You don't just leave them in the dark and say, here, do this, figure it out all on your own. No, because the point is, I'm delegating my authority to you, but I'm also accountable for your success. So there has to be, maybe you define with whoever you're delegating to, how often should we check in about this mission trip in, I keep using Cambodia. Let's say this, how often should we check in about you leading this mission trip in Cambodia? Maybe you can say, well, once a week over the phone. And I can give you a progress report, and you can tell me what challenges you're encountering, and I can walk you through some of that, right? So the last thing we have under that is recalibration. I know AGLOW is in this new season, and everybody keeps saying this is a different conference than it's been in the past, because there's a huge emphasis in what's going on in the world about Israel and our call to support that nation. But the organizations evolve, right? If we want to be sustainable, we have to continue to grow. And even as believers, we continue to mature, right? We can't be stagnant. And even as leaders, I think the best compliment to you as a leader, if somebody you've been coaching or mentoring surpasses you. Really. Yes. Because the more promotion that your people experience under you, you're leveling up yourself, right? The work of a leader is not just to make all the decisions. It's not to be a gatekeeper. but it's to be somebody that says, come, I'll show you how to do this. We'll work on this together so that you can be fully released. You can occupy territories that I can't occupy because of, I don't know, whatever the current limitations of your time is. Maybe you're rearing a child. Maybe you're getting weaker in your body and you can't quite travel as you used to. But there's the sustainability. You're passing on the baton, but there's a good way how to do it. So in terms of recalibration, this is where you continue to iterate, where you look back and say, okay, how was this mission trip we did last time? What are the things that we learned? I know a lot of ministries, what they do is they have an annual planning, and that's when they talk about this stuff. But really, you need to be talking about this with every major project. If you've just finished a project, let's say this conference, this transformation meeting, at the end of this, there has to be a meeting with all the leaders that are responsible for putting together this workshop to say what worked well. And a lot of times you assign documentation people to go in the field with you and write their observations, but that is a single perspective. You need to be able to capture the people, the perspective of the people that are actually leading in the trenches, because it's their lessons learned that will impact you for the next.
That's so good.
Right? So there's this thing called, I don't have time to go through it, but I gave you that resource there. You can just Google this, look online. It's called a retrospective report. And basically what that does, I do this for every project that I'm ready to close out. Because I don't necessarily have the same people for every project. So I want to capture what did they learn. What did they think worked well about this project? What did they think didn't work too well? And that's a tough question to ask, but you need to write that down, right? Because sometimes, okay, let's say we're on maybe this workshop after this. We begin to evaluate. We write a retrospective report. We say, so what worked well? Well, actually, these sessions from these speakers really spoke to the crowd. What didn't work well? Well, maybe the raffle next time, we should, stuff like that. You need to document. You need to write this down, but you have to debrief with the team, but you have to produce a document. Because if you don't document it, you think you'll remember this 6 months the next time you do it? Oh. So you circulate this amongst your team, you capture the lessons learned from each leader, and because they have different perspectives, they may think that something that worked well actually didn't, because they were actually behind the scenes knowing what really happened with that, right? Because a lot of times, especially when we go on mission trips, we just report on the salvations, the people that made commitments, and that's our reporting. But what if we were able to report, well, actually, the leaders that we got saved, what worked really well is we were able to bring community leaders from different parts of the town. We need to do that again for next time. What didn't really work well is we had some local pastors that continue to expand the scope of our work. They had so many demands. They're like, we came there for a worship concert and they told us, well, maybe you should put up this other event for this group. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It spreads your team too thin, and that wasn't your focus. So, you need to document all that. So, if you don't write it down, it never happened. And then, word of mouth is not good documentation. Because how many of us know, when you're told something, you have your own interpretation, and then what you remember from that conversation may be different from what was really told. So write it down, and then can you imagine how you can continue to recalibrate your trips or whatever projects you're doing, and you're going to continue to improve. And you will have progress to show for it. You'll have these reports and be like, man, when we first did this, this was all what didn't work well. But because we wrote it down for the next one, we've addressed it as lessons learned, and it didn't happen again. Right? That's the whole point, to not have it happen again. All right, so I know I need to end here, but just closing on this. The last pillar we have, if you go back to that, is self-care. Most women feel guilty taking care of themselves. They're used to taking care of their children, their husbands, the people they lead, and whoever they minister to. But really, if you cannot sustain yourself, your ministry will not be sustainable. right? So rest is so important. Even the land, according to biblical times, the land had to rest. So what makes you think you're exempt, right? So we need to build margins around our lives, the pages of our lives, where we say, nothing can write on this. This is just white space in case something comes up that needs to be addressed. Because a lot of us are spread too thin that you're like, oh gosh, I don't know where to fit you anymore. It takes us a month to meet this lady that has such an urgent need that you know is an assignment in this season. But then you have to rearrange everything and that takes forever. So make sure you create margins around your life. Don't autopilot. And another thing, multitasking is a lie. I know a lot of women wear that as a badge of honor. I used to wear it. I'm like, yeah, I can do 5 things at the same time. But really, you're not effective because you're constantly context switching, right? You're like, okay, I'm writing this